Did you know that both the loss of a loved one and the arrival of a new baby can trigger depression? Let's talk about the other forms of depression. I am Kundi Janice from BS Psychology 3B. Depression doesn't always appear out of nowhere. It's often sparked by life's most powerful events, that is death and birth. So when we grieve, psychologists like Bowlby describe four phases: the numb disbelief, yearning, despair, and finally, reorganization, which is a slowly rebuilding life after loss. So, while grief is natural, about half of people actually show resilience, experiencing little to no long-term depression. But depression can also follow new beginnings. So around 50 to 70% of new mothers experience the postpartum blues, which is mood swings, irritability, or sudden tears after childbirth. So most recover quickly, but in some cases, this can progress into postpartum depression na ini-influenced by hormones, stress, and lack of support. So whether it's lost or new life, psychology shows us that depression is complex, but also that resilience is far more common than we might think. Now let's try to think critically. Was it wise to drop the bereavement exclusion for major depression? Is grief just sadness or should be labeled depression? Well, that's according to DSM-5-TR, there was something called the bereavement exclusion. It meant that kapag nawalan ng mahalagang tao ang isang tao and showed symptoms of depression, hindi nila i-diagnose agad with major depression for at least 2 months. The idea was to protect people sa mga misdiagnosis, stigma, and unnecessary treatment since ang grief was considered a normal process. But here's the twist. Research showed that depression after bereavement looks almost identical to depression after other losses like divorce or losing a job. So in DSM-5, the exclusion wasn't expanded. It was dropped completely. So this change is controversial. On one hand, it risks pathologizing normal grief. On the other naman, it ensures that people with severe symptoms get treatment sooner. So the question remains, where do we draw the line between normal grief and clinical depression? Now let's develop our thinking. A new DSM-5 diagnosis called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So imagine, okay ka in 1 week, then suddenly, you were overwhelmed by mood swings, irritability, or even hopelessness, only for it to fade days later. That's the reality of premenstrual dysphoric disorder or PMDD, a new diagnosis in DSM-5 under depressive disorders. So to be diagnosed, symptoms must appear in most cycle for at least a year, beginning in the week before menstruation, improving a few days after, and disappearing the following week. So here's the symptoms for it. So let's move on to the causal factors in unipolar mood disorders. Nagtataka ba kayo why do some people slip into depression while others don't? Researchers explain unipolar mood disorders through 3 major lenses. That is biological, which is highlight in genetics, brain chemistry, and hormonal influence. Also, the psychological, na nakapokus sa personality traits, negative thinking patterns, and stressful life experiences ng isang tao. And lastly, the social-cultural factors, which is emphasize the impact of culture, social support, and environmental stressors. Although these are often studied separately, the real challenge is to see how they interconnect. That's why scientists aim to build a biopsychosocial model, a framework that explains unipolar depression not through one cause, but through the complex interplay of biology, mind, and society. So let's more dive into the biological factors. Did you know that even Hippocrates once linked body chemistry to depression? For centuries, the mga scientists have recognized that diseases and even certain drugs can affect mood, sometimes leading to depression, other times is to mania. So this laid the foundation for modern research into the biological basis of mood disorders. Depression is not just a battle of mind. It's written into the biology of the brain and body. So in genetic influences, family and twin studies reveal that depression can run in families, suggesting a genetic vulnerability, while no single depression gene has been found. A combination of genes interacting with the environment is nag-raise ng risk. In neurochemical factors naman, early theories blamed low levels of serotonin and norepinephrine, but research now shows a more complex picture. A disrupted interaction among neurotransmitters, including dopamine, linked to pleasure and reward play a major role. In hormonal and immune dysregulation, the HPA axis, which is nagkocontrol ng stress hormones like cortisol, is often overactive in depression. So, itong chronic stress response damages yung memory system and worsens the mood. So, these functions in the thyroid can also contribute, while yung immune system overactivation niya is through inflammatory cytokines has been tied to depressive symptoms. In neurophysiological and anatomical changes naman is, yung brain imaging reveals three distinct patterns. First is the lower activity in the left prefrontal cortex, which is nakalinked to reduce yung mga positive emotions. Second is the shrinking of the hippocampus na nakatied to memory problems. And lastly, the overactive amygdala na nagpufuel sa sensitivity to threat and negative information. So these changes may both precede and result from depression, showing a vicious cycle between brain structure and mood. Also, yung sleep and biological rhythms is kasali din sa factors. So, up to 80% of patients struggle with sleep, falling asleep too fast into REM, or losing deep restorative stages. Sa circadian rhythm, disruptions throw off mood, energy, and appetite. In seasonal affective disorder, yung lack of light sa winter worsens the depression, but yung light therapy naman is pwede niyang tulungan mag-reset yung rhythms. So, in sex differences, ang mga babae is nakaka-experience ng depression nearly twice as often as men. Kasi yung hormones alone don't fully explain these findings and also the findings are inconsistent. Still, in genetically vulnerable women, hormonal shifts during puberty, menstruation, postpartum, or menopause may act as trigger. Depression emerges from a biological network, which is yung nabanggit ko, the genes, brain chemistry, hormones, etc., and even the body's clock. But none of these act alone. They intertwine with psychology and environment, shaping the lived experiences of depression. Now, let's dive into the psychological causal factors naman. Sometimes, depression doesn't begin in the brain. It begins in life itself. Stressful life events are among the most powerful psychological triggers of unipolar depression. Ito na yung losses of a loved one, relationship breakdowns, financial crisis, health struggles, or caregiving burdens often precede the first onset of depression, especially sa mga young women who appear more sensitive to stress. So mga researchers distinguish between independent events like yung mga natural disasters or layoff and the dependent events, which is yung partly shaped by the person's own behavior, such as yung mga unresolved conflicts or neglecting daily responsibilities. So interestingly, dependent stressors play an even stronger role para ma-fuel yung depression. Nag-create siya ng cycle where poor coping generates more stress, which then deepens the depression. But there's a catch. People with depression often see the world through a darker lens, exaggerating stress. So para masolve to, psychologists develop interview-based ratings where trained evaluators judge how stressful an event would be in context, making findings more reliable. So the evidence is striking. Up to 70% of first-time depression cases are triggered by a major life event. Through the role of stress become less pronounced in recurrent episodes, chronic long-term stress like poverty, illness, or family conflict also heightens vulnerability and risk of relapse. So finally, not everyone reacts the same way. Genetic risk matters. Those with higher genetic vulnerability are more likely to translate stressful experiences into depression. So a clear example of gene-environment interaction. Stressful life events don't just add pressure sa buhay. They can flip the biological and psychological switches that ignite the depression. So there are different types of vulnerabilities for unipolar depression. The first is the personality factors. Ito na yung neuroticism or high sensitivity to negative emotion is the strongest personality risk. It is only increases the likelihood of depression but also worsen yung recovery. Low positive effect like lack of joy, energy, and confidence may also contribute. The second one is the cognitive vulnerabilities, which is ito yung negative thinking patterns such as yung attributing failures to internal like it's my fault. Yung stable naman is I'll never change. And the global naman is I fail at everything causes increased susceptibility when stressful events occur. So in early adversity, childhood experiences like abuse, neglect, harsh parenting, or parental loss create a long-term vulnerability by affecting stress response systems, attachment, and subsystem. But however, moderate adversity may sometimes build resilience like stir inoculation. Personality traits, maladaptive thinking, and early adversity interact with stress, making some individuals much more vulnerable to depression than others. So there are 5 major psychological theories of depression. The first one is the psychodynamic theory ni Freud and Abraham, which is depression resembles mourning. It is anger turned inward. So real or symbolic losses like failure in school or rejection may trigger yung mga depressive symptoms, highlighting the central role of loss. In behavior theory naman, depression arises kapag yung positive reinforcement is nagde-decrease and yung negative experiences naman is nado-dominate. Low activity levels and reduced rewards trap individuals in a cycle of low mood. Behavioral activation therapy is based sa model na to. So in Beck's cognitive theory, negative thinking drives depression. Dysfunctional beliefs create the negative triad, which is yung negative views of the self. For example, sasabihin ng tao, I'm worthless. Tapos, yung the world naman, sabihin niya, no one loves me. And the future naman, nothing will change. Ganun. So, cognitive distortion maintain this cycle. So, helplessness and hopelessness theories. So, when people feel they lack control over bad events, they may develop helplessness. So, reformulated models emphasizes pessimistic attribution styles and hopelessness beliefs that bad outcomes are inevitable and uncontrollable, leading to depression. The other one is the ruminative response styles theory ni Nolan and Hoxema. People who dwell on their sadness and endlessly ask, bakit ako? Or why me? A process called rumination. So, experience longer and more severe episodes. So, women are more prone sa mga ganitong style, which helps explain higher depression rates. So, these theories differ in focus loss, reinforcement, cognition, control, and rumination, but together, nare-reveal nila on how psychological processes shape vulnerability to depression.